Good morning. As the commander mentioned today, on this 100th anniversary of the American Legion, we remember Wilbur E. Tarbell. As you entered the cemetery today, you passed under a wrought iron gate archway, which was dedicated to Tarbell on Memorial Day 1947. I would like to introduce my daughter, Kim Montario, with the help of Fielder Caldwell and Earl Pelletier, Tarbell's sister and niece. Kim researched and wrote this speech for us today. Kim?
If you'd like to be seated, you can. Good morning. It is an honor and privilege to share with you what I learned about Wilbur E. Tarbell. 52 U.S. submarines were lost during World War II, and only 6 have been found. These 52 submarines represent 374 officers, 3,131 men of the submarine force. Wilbur Everett Tarbell, who we honor and recognize today, was one of those 3,131 men. In fact, Wilbur Tarbell was the only serviceman from Windham killed in action in World War II. He is honored on the walls of the missing in the Manila American Cemetery in the Philippines. His name appears in the War Memorial Room at the University of New Hampshire, and he is remembered in several places in Windham, on a marble plaque in the Windham Museum, and here in the cemetery on the plain on the wrought iron gateway, as my dad just shared. But what do we know of Wilbur Tarbell and his all too brief life cut short? Born on August 18, 1920, in Mapleton, Maine, Wilbur Tarbell was the only son of Morris and Elva Tarbell. His only sibling was his sister Fielda, here with us today. When he was 21 months old, the family moved to southern New Hampshire. Although they did not live permanently in Windham until 1932, they were frequent visitors. Wilbur went to school in Pelham, Warner, and in Salem, New Hampshire. While attending Woodbury High in Salem, he represented the school his junior and senior years in the YMCA basketball tournaments, which hosted the best players in the region. And he graduated from Woodbury High in 1938, a 3-sport letterman. Wilbur was remembered after his loss as a natural-born leader among the young people, with an engaging personality and a character without blemish. He enlisted in the Navy on January 12, 1942. After boot camp, he joined the submarine service. An average of 9 out of every 100 applicants was selected for the preliminary testing at the Navy's National Submarine Training School at New Haven, Connecticut. Of that select group, 25 to 30% were rejected before the program even began, based on tests given to determine who was physically and mentally fit for submarine duty. The submarine service during World War II was the most dangerous duty in the military, with a casualty rate around 20%. More than 3,000 sailors, nearly 1 in 5 serving aboard diesel submarines, died during the war. In October of 1942, Wilbur was assigned to the USS Scorpion 278, one of the new Gato class of submarines. Gato-class boats carried the brunt of the U.S. submarine war early in World War II. The diesel-electric submarines of this class were some of the most heavily armed subs of the war. World War subs were basically surface ships that could travel underwater for a limited time. Diesel engines gave them high surface speed and long range, but speed and range were severely reduced underwater, where they relied on electric motors powered by relatively short-lived storage batteries. Recharging these batteries meant surfacing to the air. Even combat patrols routinely involved 90% or more surface operations. Laid down in March of 1942 in Portsmouth Navy Yard, the USS Scorpion was the 5th submarine to bear this name. It was an aptly named boat, as the scorpion in the order of arachnids has an elongated body and a narrow segmented tail bearing a venomous sting at the tip. There's a picture here, too, of it being put into the water. Initially, the Scorpion spent time in the Naval Yard in what is called a fitting out period. It took several months, and the most important thing during this period was to mold the crew into a cohesive unit able to respond instinctively in times of stress. The USS Scorpion was commissioned on October 1st, 1942, and Wilbur reported for duty on October 5th from the Naval Sub Base New London. He joined the crew as the electrician's mate, 3rd class. Lieutenant Scratch reported, quote, "The officers and men have shaped up beautifully. We have the makings of a superb command," end quote. Over the next couple months, the Scorpion was taken through dock trials, torpedo trials, training and inspection, and in December of 1942, the weekend before Christmas, Wilbur returned home to Windham to attend his sister's wedding at the Windham Presbyterian Church, where he was a member. And then on Sunday afternoon of the same weekend, he wed Doris Plimpton in the Derry Baptist Church. But then in January of 1943, he was back on duty as the Scorpion conducted shakedown operations of the southern New England coast and completed trials and final training in Newport, Rhode Island. The officers and crew received blessings and high praise from the commander of the submarine's Atlantic and his staff. The sub carried almost 80 crew members in very cramped quarters. Early in the morning of February 24, 1943, the Scorpion sailed down the river channel and headed south to Key West, Florida, for more training dives, emergency drills, all the while keeping a lookout for German submarines that might be patrolling the East Coast. Then it was on to Pearl Harbor by way of the Panama Canal. They entered the canal on March 9, 1943, and then would not arrive at subbase Pearl Harbor until March 24th. On arrival, there was still evidence everywhere of the December 7th disaster 2 years earlier, including the scarred, sunken remains of the USS Arizona. Repairs and training would keep the Scorpion in Pearl Harbor for 2 more weeks before leaving on April 5, 1943 for the first war patrol, a hunting and mining mission off the coast of Honshu. Before leaving, Tarbell received a rank advancement of electrician's mate 2nd class. Submarines in the Pacific often patrolled alone without escort. It was no different for the Scorpion. After initially being escorted by PC-582, they went on to Midway alone. Midway had been the site of a decisive victory less than a year earlier by the U.S. over Japanese forces. Mostly fought in the air, the Battle of Midway helped end the threat of further Japanese invasion and helped preserve the military base there for future operations in the Pacific. Midway provided a brief stopover for refueling and repair for the Scorpion. It's said to get its name from its location, midway between San Francisco and Tokyo. The following is an overview of what Wilbur Tarbell experienced during his service on the first 2 patrols of the USS Scorpion. Much of this information comes from a history of the USS Scorpion submarine SS-278 by Frank Gamer. This account, written in diary form, relied heavily on the patrol reports written by the captain, deck logs, and the first-hand account of Paul Schratz, gunner officer of the first 2 patrols, and the recollections of radioman James Piper, who served on the first patrol. The Scorpion left Midway by dark, escorted by aircraft on April 9th for its first patrol. It was headed for the east coast of Japan. On the 19th of April, the Scorpion reached the coast in the evening and placed mines off Kashimanada, Japan. Then it returned to deep water. On the 20th, she torpedoed and sank her first enemy ship, a 1,900-ton converted gunboat. In the following days, the Scorpion engaged and torpedoed several more ships, including a Japanese merchant cargo ship and a guard boat, 4 ships in all, totaling 20,000 tons. They also came under attack by depth charges. Depth charges, also called depth bombs, were the basic anti-submarine weapon of World War II. It was a large explosive charge with a fuse that could be set to explode at the estimated depth of the submarine. The resulting shock wave was capable of buckling a submarine hull. Being subjected to an accurate depth charge attack was a terrifying experience. Until quite late in the war, there was no way for a submarine to effectively counterattack a depth charge on its position. The submarine could only take evasive measures and hope for the best. The nearby detonation of a depth charge produced a sharp metallic bang from a shock wave hitting the submarine hull, followed by a much louder boom from the sound waves from the explosion. The closer the depth charge, the closer together the louder the boom from the sound waves from the explosion. The closer the depth charge, the closer together the bang and the boom were. If they were nearly simultaneous, they might be the last sounds that the crew heard. In a diary kept by the officer on the first patrol of the Scorpion, he recorded the panicked experience by one of the crewmen when they came under a depth charge attack. He attempted to get out of the submarine that was submerged by trying to open the hatch. Many of the men would gather and pray during such an attack. As the Scorpion completed its first patrol and headed back to Pearl Harbor on April 30th, she engaged and destroyed a patrol ship. However, during the 2 hours of gunfire, one of her officers on board was killed. Soon after, an enemy plane appeared and began another depth charge attack. The Scorpion survived and arrived back in Pearl Harbor on May 8th. After 10 days of rest and repair to the sub, as was standard procedure, 1/5 of the crew was swapped out with replacements from relief crews. After the transfers between the USS Scorpion and the USS Runner, the Scorpion spent 3 days at sea in advanced training and drills for the new team. The second patrol retraced the path of the first, leading back to Midway, but then headed south of Japan to enter the Yellow Sea between China, Japan, and Korea. The orders were to search for targets and attempt to disrupt the shipping routes. This area was extremely dangerous for several reasons. First, the Japanese had laid an enormous minefield to protect the trade routes. Second, much of the China coast was poorly charted. And third, the water throughout the northern part of the area was very shallow, all of it under 300 feet. Good submarining required 600 feet. Evasion would be difficult. The Scorpion arrived in the area at the end of June, eventually entering the Yellow Sea at the beginning of July on July 3rd. It encountered a 5-freighter convoy with 1 escort and sent torpedoes toward the convoy before diving. Almost immediately, depth charges occurred. Post-war examination of Japanese records show the Scorpion scored 5 hits, sank a freighter and cargo ship. The Scorpion retraced her routes, underwent a bomber attack, and finally returned to Pearl Harbor on July 26th. She did not leave on her third war patrol until October 13th. This time she headed for the South China Sea, again by way of Midway, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Schmidt. Not until November 3rd did they sight their first target, a Mogami-class cruiser. Over the course of the next month, the Scorpion would encounter 5 other ships, but due to heavy seas and squalls, counterattacks, and low fuel, they were only able to inflict damage on a tanker before returning to Pearl Harbor. The Scorpion left Pearl Harbor on its final patrol December 29th, headed back to the East China and Yellow Seas. On January 5th, she attempted a rendezvous with the USS Herring to transfer an injured man. Heavy seas prevented the transfer, and the Scorpion continued west. The Scorpion was never heard from again. Information from the Japanese after the war indicate the submarine may have been hit by a mine. There were several mine lines across the entrance of the Yellow Sea that were unknown to the U.S. military at the time. The USS Scorpion was lost soon after these mine lines were laid. Official record assumes it was a victim of one of these Japanese mines, and it was considered lost on March 6, 1944. During the Second World War, submarines comprised less than 2% of the U.S. Navy, but sank 30% of the Japanese Navy, including 8 aircraft carriers. More important, American submarines contributed to the virtual strangling of the Japanese economy by sinking almost 5 million tons of shipping, over 60% of the merchant marine. Victory at sea did not come cheaply. The submarine force lost 52 boats, 3,506 men, including Wilbur E. Tarbell. The service of men like Wilbur Tarbell on submarines can best be appreciated by the words spoken of them by Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Chester Nimitz. Quote, "We who survived World War II and were privileged to rejoin our loved ones at home salute those gallant officers and men of our submarines who lost their lives in that long struggle. We shall never forget that it was our submarines that held the line against the enemy, while our fleets replaced losses and repaired wounds." End quote. I would like to conclude by reading the Navy hymn for submariners. Bless those who serve beneath the deep, through the lonely hours, the vigil they had to keep. May eternal peace their mission ever be. Bless each one we ask of thee. Comfort those who at home who waited and prayed for their return night and day. Thank you.